Do not call her my mate. Rowan Blackwood's voice cut through the royal hall just as the ink beneath Elara Vale's signature ignited with brilliant silver light. Gasps echoed from every corner of the chamber. The elegant black script twisted across the parchment, reshaping itself into an ancient symbol no one had seen in generations. Before anyone could kneel or celebrate, Rowan stepped forward and placed one hand over the glowing contract. The mark chose its own path, he declared. No law, no ritual, and no king has the authority to force that bond upon her. His words only deepened the chaos. Courtiers whispered that the feared Alpha King had finally claimed an unwilling Omega. Others insisted the ceremony had exposed his true ambition. Elara stared at the contract in disbelief. She had signed a legal agreement meant to protect the royal wards, yet the silver emblem pulsed beneath her name like a living heartbeat. She instinctively pulled her hand away, but the light faded only after leaving a faint matching mark upon her wrist. Rowan noticed it immediately. His expression remained calm, though something unspoken flickered behind his grey-blue eyes. The royal chancellor stepped forward with barely concealed excitement. By the oldest covenant, the bond is recognized before the crown. Rowan met the man's gaze without raising his voice. Then the oldest covenant is incomplete. Silence swept across the hall. No one challenged him, yet no one understood what he meant. Elara reached for the contract again, intending to read every line herself. As her fingertips brushed the parchment, fresh silver letters slowly appeared beneath the final signature. They had not existed moments earlier. Even the royal scribes leaned closer in stunned disbelief. Rowan quietly moved beside her, careful not to touch either the contract or her hand. "Do not rush," he said softly. "Ancient agreements reveal themselves one truth at a time." Elara scanned the emerging words. They did not describe marriage, ownership, or obedience. Instead, they referred to shared guardianship over something called the First Ward Network. Before she could finish reading, voices erupted throughout the chamber. Some nobles demanded the agreement be destroyed before the bond strengthened. Others insisted the ceremony continue exactly as tradition required. Rowan neither argued nor commanded. He simply stood between Elara and the growing crowd, creating enough space for her to think. She looked at him, searching for signs of deception, but found only quiet resolve. Then another line of silver writing appeared across the bottom of the page, one that neither Rowan nor the royal archivist seemed prepared to see. The hidden clause ended with a single sentence that made every elder in the chamber lose the color from their faces: "The second guardian shall awaken only when both bear the truth without fear." The royal palace rose above the surrounding forests like a fortress carved from silver and black stone, its towering walls reflecting the fading light of evening. Elara Vale crossed the threshold without hesitation, though every servant and royal guard watched her with quiet curiosity. Rumors had traveled faster than she had. Some believed she had enchanted the feared Alpha King. Others whispered she was merely another piece in a dangerous political game. Rowan Blackwood dismissed every attendant waiting inside the entrance hall until only the two of them remained beneath the vaulted ceiling. "Before we begin," he said, "tell me what you need to remain here by your own choice." Elara opened her notebook. She refused to let assumptions define this partnership before it truly began. She wrote her first condition carefully. "No one enters my room without permission." Rowan read it once and nodded immediately. "Agreed." She continued writing. "I keep full access to every record connected to the royal wards." Again he answered without hesitation. "Granted. If you are expected to protect them, nothing will be hidden from you." Elara looked at him for a long moment before writing the third line. "If I decide to leave, no one follows me and no one stops me." Rowan remained silent. It was the first request he did not answer immediately. The silence stretched until even the distant echoes of the palace disappeared. Finally he spoke. "I can accept the first two because they protect your freedom." His expression remained calm, but noticeably heavier than before. "The third is different. Elara waited. If you leave the palace while the second guardian clause is active, the bond will not simply weaken. He looked toward the ancient stone floor beneath the throne chamber. The first ward network will begin separating from its second anchor. She frowned, uncertain whether he meant the palace or herself. Rowan chose his words carefully. The collapse would not happen at once. It would begin with us. He did not describe pain or catastrophe. He simply stated the consequence with quiet certainty. If the separation continues long enough, neither of us survives it, and every connected ward protecting the territories begins failing afterward. Elara searched his face for manipulation but found none. If anything, he seemed reluctant to reveal the truth. She slowly closed her notebook. You still decide whether to stay, Rowan added. Knowing the cost is not the same as losing the choice. Before she could respond, a faint metallic vibration echoed beneath the enormous throne occupying the center of the great hall. Elara instinctively turned toward the sound. It lasted only a heartbeat before disappearing into silence. She noticed Rowan glance toward the throne for the first time since they entered. His composure remained intact, yet he did not move closer. Beneath the throne, hidden behind centuries of polished stone, lay a sealed chamber no servant was permitted to enter. And whatever rested inside had just answered the appearance of the second guardian. The first week inside the royal palace passed without ceremony. Elara expected guards to shadow every step, servants to monitor every conversation, and endless reminders that she was living beneath the roof of the Alpha King. Instead, Rowan honored the boundaries she had written on the first day. No one entered her chambers without permission. Every archive she requested was opened. No one questioned where she spent her hours. The palace was quieter than the rumors had promised. One rainy afternoon, while returning a stack of ward records to the Eastern Archive, Elara noticed a young Omega servant trembling outside an administrative office. An older official demanded she sign an admission accepting punishment for violating an outdated labor rule. The young woman stared at the paper with frightened eyes. Before Elara could intervene, Rowan appeared from the opposite corridor. He did not raise his voice or accuse anyone. He simply requested the regulation being enforced. The official proudly handed over the document. Rowan examined it for less than a minute before folding it closed. This law was repealed 4 winters ago. The corridor fell silent. Any punishment issued under an invalid statute is void. The official immediately stepped back. Rowan returned the unsigned paper to the servant. You owe no confession for a law that no longer exists. The young Omega whispered a grateful thank you before hurrying away. Rowan continued walking as though nothing remarkable had happened. No announcement. No applause. No attempt to improve his reputation. Elara watched him disappear down the corridor, struggling to reconcile the quiet man she had just witnessed with the ruthless tyrant described by nearly every story she had ever heard. Later that evening, while studying historical correspondence in the palace library, one of the senior royal advisors approached her carrying a sealed portfolio. His silver hair and measured tone suggested decades of loyal service. You deserve to know why many still fear the king, he said gently. He placed several copied letters before her. The first described unusual royal observers visiting Silver Creek years before her public rejection. Another authorized discreet reports concerning her behavior. A third contained Rowan's own royal seal approving continued surveillance of her pack. Elara's heartbeat slowed as she examined the dates. Every document appeared genuine. The advisor lowered his voice. The king claims he protected you only after learning the truth. He paused before sliding the final page across the table. But perhaps he needed your exile to bring you here. Elara stared at Rowan's unmistakable seal impressed into the wax. The room suddenly felt much colder. Had Rowan quietly watched her life unfold? From the beginning, allowing every humiliation because it served a greater plan? Before she could answer the question herself, she noticed something almost invisible beneath the broken wax. A second seal had once been pressed beneath Rowan's, then carefully scraped away. Elara carried the contract into the oldest archive beneath the royal palace, where shelves of weathered ledgers stood beside carved stone walls that had survived centuries of forgotten kings. The hidden clause still troubled her. It had appeared only after the silver mark awakened, as though the parchment itself had been waiting for someone specific to sign it. Rowan had granted her unrestricted access to every royal record, and he never once asked what she intended to search for. That silence felt less like distance now and more like trust. Guided by faded references inside the ward registry, Elara uncovered a locked chest bearing the crest of the first guardians. The iron clasp had rusted beyond use, but the wood yielded gently beneath careful pressure. Inside rested brittle journals, sealed correspondence, and one final contract written in the same silver ink that had transformed her own signature. At the bottom of the ancient document was the unmistakable signature of Lyra Ashbourne, the last recorded guardian whose disappearance had remained unexplained for generations. Elara compared every stroke of the handwriting with the hidden clause on her own agreement. The flourishes matched perfectly. This was not a new contract at all. It was the continuation of an oath someone else had once carried. As she turned another fragile page, a folded diagram slipped onto the table. It depicted the royal palace, the first ward network, and a single chamber hidden beneath the throne. The center of the drawing was not labeled as a prison or treasury. Instead, one carefully written note read, "Anchor of the burden." Her pulse quickened. She hurried through the remaining journal until one passage stopped her completely. The first guardian had written that the royal contract existed because the ancient curse could never be destroyed. It could only be contained inside one living bearer at a time. The second signature did not imprison the new guardian. It reinforced the prison surrounding the curse itself. Elara felt the room grow strangely quiet. Every rumor calling Rowan a tyrant suddenly seemed painfully incomplete. He had never used the contract to trap her beside him. The contract had prevented the burden inside him from breaking free. Soft footsteps echoed beyond the archive doorway. Rowan paused without entering, respecting the boundary she had established on her first day. "You found something," he said gently. Elara looked up, holding the centuries-old journal in trembling hands. For the first time, she understood why exhaustion always lingered behind his steady eyes. He had not inherited a throne alone. He had inherited a living prison that no one else could safely carry. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Words suddenly seemed far too small beside a truth that had survived generations in silence. 3 days remained until the full moon when the royal council assembled beneath the vaulted ceiling of the palace chamber. Every silver ward along the walls glowed more brightly than usual, as though the ancient network itself understood that time was running short. The High Chancellor rose first, carrying a sealed decree already signed by a majority of the council. "Your Majesty," he announced, "the kingdom cannot continue beneath uncertainty. The contract has divided the territories. For the stability of every pack, you must choose." Rowan accepted the parchment without changing expression. "State the choice." The chamber became unnaturally still. "Keep the throne and dissolve the contract, or preserve the contract and surrender the crown to a temporary regent until the bond is resolved." Murmurs spread immediately. On the surface, the proposal appeared balanced. Yet Elara sensed something deeply wrong. She asked to examine the decree before Rowan answered. The council reluctantly agreed. As she compared the language with the original royal contract, one phrase caught her attention. The decree referred to dissolution by royal authority. The ancient contract never used that wording. Every genuine record described only completion or fulfillment. No legitimate document suggested it could simply be cancelled. She quietly wrote a note and placed it before Rowan. "This is not a choice. It is a trigger." Rowan read the sentence once before sliding the paper back without comment. He understood exactly what she meant. If he attempted to dissolve the contract through royal authority, somewhat expected the First Ward network to recognize the order as a breach rather than a lawful conclusion. The council was not offering him two paths. They were steering him toward a single fatal mistake. Elara requested permission to address the chamber herself. Instead of accusing anyone, she proposed a public verification. Every surviving version of the contract, every archived copy, and every ceremonial transcription would be brought into the Great Hall before moonrise the following evening. If the agreement had never been altered, each copy would display identical wording beneath the same ward light. If someone had secretly rewritten even one clause, the silver ink preserved by the ancient wards would expose every alteration. Several council members immediately objected, arguing that the archives were too sacred to disturb. Their resistance confirmed her suspicion more than any accusation could have. Rowan calmly accepted her proposal. The verification will proceed. His decision echoed through the chamber like a final verdict. As the meeting ended, the palace bell announced sunset. Only 72 hours remained before the full moon reached its highest point. While attendants extinguished the chamber lanterns, Elara noticed one counselor quietly remove a small key from his sleeve and slip toward the restricted archive beneath the throne, long after everyone else believed the meeting had ended. The great hall filled long before sunrise. Every surviving copy of the royal contract rested upon a circular stone table beneath the oldest ward crystal in the kingdom. Council members, royal archivists, neighboring alphas, and investigators watched in complete silence as Elara stepped forward carrying the original agreement she had signed. 3 nights remained until the full moon, and tension hung over the chamber like gathering rain. The High Chancellor confidently announced that every document had already been authenticated. Elara did not answer. Instead, she arranged each contract according to the year it had been recorded, not by the order preserved inside the archives. Several elders exchanged puzzled looks, but Rowan remained silent, allowing her reasoning to unfold. Elara slowly traced the silver sealing marks with one fingertip. She was not reading the words. She was reading the order in which the ancient ward had accepted them. The seals responded differently to every generation of guardian, preserving invisible layers no forged copy could perfectly imitate. One document reflected the ward's original rhythm. Another hesitated before answering. A third remained completely still. Elara carefully placed those 3 side by side before writing a single sentence across her notebook. One contract was altered. One was copied. One remembers the truth. The room fell silent as she pointed toward the oldest version. The hidden seal beneath the parchment awakened first, revealing a second line of authorization that no fresh ink could reproduce. It belonged to the lost first guardian. The copied contract remained unchanged. The altered one flickered uncertainly before exposing tiny corrections hidden beneath decorative lettering. Every modification traced back to the same administrative authorization used years earlier to rewrite birth records and ward instructions. The counselor who had slipped toward the restricted archive the previous evening instinctively stepped backward. His face betrayed him before his words could. Rowan turned toward him. For the first time since Elara entered the palace, the burden hidden within the Alpha King seemed to push against its prison. The silver ward surrounding the hall pulsed violently. Shadows deepened across the stone floor, and every royal guard instinctively retreated. The stories calling Rowan a tyrant suddenly felt terrifyingly believable. Not because he desired power, but because everyone could sense the immense force he restrained every waking moment. The frightened counselor dropped to one knee, unable to meet the king's gaze. Rowan took one step forward. Then Elara quietly spoke. Rowan. It was only his name. Soft. Steady. Unafraid. The effect was immediate. The trembling ward light settled. The heavy silence lifted. Rowan closed his eyes for one measured breath before the dangerous pressure surrounding him disappeared as though it had never existed. When he looked at Elara again, gratitude replaced the strain behind his grey-blue eyes. The ancient mate bond had not given her power over him. It had given him something he had not possessed for years, someone whose voice could reach him before the curse did. The council chamber emptied slowly after the forged contract was exposed, leaving only scattered documents and the fading glow of the restored ward stones. Outside, twilight settled over the palace gardens, softening the towering walls that had once seemed so unwelcoming. Rowan found Elara standing beside a quiet fountain where the sound of flowing water almost erased the noise of the court behind them. For several moments neither spoke. Then Rowan removed the leather folder containing the royal contract and placed it in her hands. "It belongs to you now," he said. Elara looked at him with quiet confusion. He continued before she could write a question. "If you wish to leave tonight, you may. The palace gates will open. No guard will follow you. No order will stop you. The contract will never matter more than your choice." She searched his face, expecting another hidden condition, another legal clause buried beneath careful words. There was none. He had already instructed the royal captain to honor whatever decision she made. For the first time since signing the agreement, she realized he had never tried to own her future. He had only tried to protect her long enough for her to decide it herself. Elara opened her notebook and slowly wrote, "You knew I might walk away." Rowan smiled faintly. "I hoped you would stay. Those are not the same thing." The answer lingered between them with unexpected warmth. She closed the notebook and met his eyes instead. Speaking still demanded effort, yet she chose the words carefully. "Thank you, Rowan." Her voice was quiet but steady. He lowered his head ever so slightly, as though her trust carried greater weight than any royal title. "Whatever this bond becomes," he answered, "it will never ask you to become someone you are not." The silence that followed felt peaceful rather than uncertain. No promises were exchanged. No dramatic declarations filled the evening air. Instead, they stood together watching the first stars appear above the palace, both understanding that trust had begun replacing fear one honest choice at a time. Before returning to her chambers, Elara agreed to visit the royal healer for a routine examination. The healer explained that the awakened bond sometimes affected breathing, sleep, and the ancient wards themselves. As enchanted instruments quietly measured the bond's resonance, the elderly healer frowned in confusion. He listened again, then dismissed every assistant from the room. "This should not be possible," he whispered. "There is another heartbeat linked to the bond." Elara felt the color leave her face. The healer quickly lowered his voice. "I cannot yet explain what it means, but you must tell the king immediately." She looked toward the closed palace doors, remembering that the council had already hidden forged records, altered contracts, and planted spies within the court. Slowly, she shook her head. If the wrong person learned of this before the truth was understood, another conspiracy would begin before the first had truly ended. She quietly placed a finger to her lips, asking the healer for silence, while Rowan waited only a few corridors away, unaware that a new secret had already come between them. Before dawn, the royal council gathered one final time beneath the restored ward lights. The evidence recovered from the ancient contracts, the hidden seals, and the altered archives had stripped away every remaining defense. One by one, the counselors who had manipulated the records surrendered their ceremonial keys and administrative authority. Their titles remained matters for lawful review, but their power over the royal wards ended that morning. As the final decree was sealed, a quiet pulse traveled through the palace floor. The silver light flowing beneath the stone steadied. For the first time in generations, Rowan felt the crushing pressure he carried every day ease, if only slightly. The curse had not vanished, yet it no longer fought constantly against its prison. The kingdom celebrated the return of stability, believing the crisis had passed. Elara alone knew the story was unfinished. The healer's whispered discovery echoed through every silent moment. A second heartbeat linked to the awakened bond was impossible according to every surviving record. If the remaining conspirators learned of it before the truth became clear, they would not see a child. They would see another claim to power. She spent the final hours of darkness packing only what she had carried when she first entered the palace, her notebook, a few clothes, and the worn satchel that had followed her since Silver Creek. Nothing more. Before leaving, she unfolded the royal contract one last time. The silver words remained unchanged. Rowan had honored every promise within it. Trust had become real. That was precisely why she could not allow him to become the next target. She slipped the simple silver ring that had accompanied the contract onto the writing desk beside a folded piece of blank parchment. No explanation. No farewell. If anyone intercepted a letter, it could become another weapon against them both. Outside, the eastern sky slowly brightened as she crossed the quiet palace gardens. The guards opened the gates without question, following Rowan's standing order that her choice would always be her own. None attempted to stop her. None followed. She disappeared into the mist beyond the forest road just as the first rays of sunrise touched the palace towers. Hours later, Rowan returned from inspecting the stabilized wards beneath the throne. He expected to find Alara reviewing records inside the library or studying the ancient maps she favored. Instead, the servant quietly informed him that her chambers had remained unopened since dawn. He entered the room himself. Everything was orderly. The contract was gone. The silver ring rested alone upon the desk. For one long moment he simply stood in the silence she had left behind. Then a faint unfamiliar scent drifted through the room, warm, ancient, and unmistakable. Rowan closed his eyes as recognition settled over him with equal parts hope and fear. It was the scent spoken of only in the oldest Guardian journals. Rowan stepped into the empty room and caught the unmistakable scent of the air.